The album Born Under a Bad Sign by Albert King was released in August of 1967, and the tracks were recorded between March 1966 and June 1967. Prior to this album, Albert King had released just one album in 1962 called The Big Blues, which at the time he had a contract with King Records. And before that, he had recorded with several labels including Parrot, which he recorded 5 songs in 1953. The next label was Bobbin Records, which he signed a contract in the summer of 1959. The next label that he worked with was King Records, which released his first successful song up to that point called Don't Throw Your Love on Me So Strong in October of 1961. Then in 1962, King Records released a full album of the songs that he recorded at Bobbin Records, and the title of the album, as mentioned earlier, was The Big Blues. The next year, he went to an independent label called Count Tree. Then in 1966, he signed a contract with Stax Records in Memphis, and the album Born Under a Bad Sign was his first recording and first release with the label. He stayed with the Stax Records until 1974, and after that he recorded with some other labels like Utopia, Tomato, and Fantasy. He recorded many of his songs throughout the 1960s in Stax Records with Booker T and the MGs. In this album, the title track and also The Hunter was even written by Booker T. Jones, alongside some other composers including William Bell, C. Wells, Al Jackson Jr., Donald Don, and Steve Cropper. Albert King was a left-handed guitarist who was usually using a right-handed guitar upside down. He is famous for his Gibson Flying V guitars that he used throughout his career. He was also fingerpicking. Albert King, alongside B.B. King and Freddie King, are considered the kings of the blues. He was one of the most influential blues guitarists on the next generation, both black and white, including Eric Clapton, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Robert Cray, Otis Rush, Jimi Hendrix, Mick Taylor, Joe Walsh, Mike Bloomfield, and even Albert Collins. Even though Albert King is one of the most important and influential guitarists in the history of the blues, but he used to record many of the other blues composers' songs. In this album, the only 2 songs that he wrote are Down Don't Bother Me and Personal Manager, which he co-wrote with David Porter. All of the other 9 songs in this album have been written by other people. The lyrics of the title track, Born Under a Bad Sign, has been written by William Bell and the music by Booker T. Jones, and it was recorded on May 17, 1967 in Stax Records Studio, Memphis, Tennessee. Jones's arrangement for the song doesn't follow the typical 12-bar blues 1-4-5 progression. Albert King provided his signature guitar fills around his vocals and solos during the break and outro, with backing by Booker T and the MGs and the Memphis Horns. Born Under a Bad Sign became a Billboard R&B chart hit for Albert King, reaching number 49. Albert King recorded an updated version of Born Under a Bad Sign with producer Allen Toussaint for his 1978 New Orleans hit album. Live versions are included on Wednesday Night in San Francisco, Chicago 1978, In Session with Stevie Ray Vaughan, The Godfather of the Blues, his last European tour 1992, and Talking Blues. It also has been covered by several blues musicians and blues rock bands, including Cream for their 1968 album Wheels of Fire, Paul Rogers, Magic Slim, Paul Butterfield Blues Band for their 1967 album The Resurrection of Pig Boy Crabshaw, and also Jimi Hendrix. The next song, Crosscut Saw, was first released on September 15, 1941 by Mississippi bluesman Tommy McLennan, but it was recorded on June 3, 1941 by another Mississippi bluesman, Tony Hollins, but his version wasn't released until 1992. When Albert King recorded his version on November 2, 1966, he used the same lyrics as McLennan's but replaced 2 verses by guitar solos. The song was a success and reached number 34 in the Billboard R&B chart. Albert King recorded another studio version of the song for his 1974 album I Wanna Get Funky, with many of the same Stax personnel, but a fuller, funkier arrangement and beat. Kansas City, the third song, was written by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller in 1952, which were inspired by Big Joe Turner. They wrote it specifically for blues and R&B artist Little Willie Littlefield, which was first recorded on August 12, 1952 in Los Angeles. The song has more than 300 versions and has been recorded by many artists, including Little Richard, which recorded two different versions of the song in 1955, first on September 13th and then on November 29th. The Beatles also recorded the modified version of Little Richard's Kansas City in October of 1964. Their version uses different lyrics and appears on the albums Beatles for Sale in UK and Beatles for US. James Brown also recorded a version of the song in 1967, and a funkier version appeared on his 1975 album Everybody's Doing the Hustle and Dead on the Double Bump, and also a live version in 1968. When James Brown passed away, Kansas City was performed at the conclusion of his funeral in 2006. Some other musicians who have covered Kansas City are Bill Haley and his Comets from the self-titled album in 1960, Brenda Lee from All the Way in 1961, Peggy Lee from Blues Cross Country 1962, and Miss Peggy Lee Sings the Blues 1988, Jan and Dean from Surf City and Other Swinging Cities 1963, Jay and the Americans from At the Cafe Wall 1963, Fats Domino as a single 1964, Sammy Davis Jr. from Sammy Davis Jr. Sings the Big Ones for Young Lovers 1964, The Everly Brothers from Rock and Soul 1965, Tom Jones from the Heart 1966, and Muddy Waters from Muddy Mississippi Waters Live 1979. Also, the Grateful Dead played the song on October 28, 1985, the day after the Kansas City Royals won their first World Series. The next song, Oh Pretty Woman, was written by A.C. Williams and doesn't have anything to do with the Roy Orbison's song with the same name. Like the other songs in the album, it has Albert King's signature bending technique and an overall warm soul blues feeling that the listener gets from the whole album. Down Don't Bother Me, as mentioned earlier, is one of the two songs in the album that was written by Albert King himself. It's the shortest song in the album and is in the same line of the other songs, even though there are different composers behind each track of the album, but it's as if they all represent the same concept as a whole, and Down Don't Bother Me is not an exception. The Hunter is the other song in the album that was written by Booker T. Jones, and he co-wrote it alongside Sewells, Al Jackson Jr., Donald Dunn, and Steve Cropper. Along with Born Under a Bad Sign and Crosscut Saw, The Hunter is one of Albert King's best known and most recorded songs. It was recorded on June 9, 1967 in Stax Record Studio in Memphis, Tennessee. The Hunter has been covered by some important blues musicians and blues rock bands during late 60s, including Ike and Tina Turner, which released a version of the song in 1969 in an album with the same name, and also as a single. It also has been covered by Blue Cheer in the album Outside Inside in 1968, by the band Free in the album Tons of Sobs in 1968, by Pacific Gas and Electric in the album Get It On in 1968, and Blues Magoos in Never Going Back to Georgia in 1969. Can't Hit recorded a demo version in 1967, but re-recorded it as Amphetamine Annie using the same music in the album Boogie with Can't Hit in 1968. The next song, I Almost Lost My Mind, was written by Ivory Joe Hunter and recorded on October 1, 1949. It was a rhythm and blues hit and has been covered by many musicians including Nat King Cole in 1950, Pat Boone in 1956, Chubby Checker in 1961, Solomon Burke in 1962, Eddie Cochran in 1963, and some other musicians throughout the years before Albert King recorded his version in 1967 for Born Under a Bad Sign album. Even though this version has some specific Albert King blues soloing in the middle, but it has a softer and more mellow sound compared to the other songs of the album. Personal Manager, the other song that was written by Albert King himself alongside David Porter, is the longest song in the album, and his two-chorus solo has been one of his finest playing moments. It was recorded on May 17, 1967, and then an edit to the song issued on May 25th, and finally the complete version from the album on July 10, 1967. Laundromat Blues was written by Sandy Jones. It was recorded March 25, 1966, in Albert King's first recording session in Stax Records and brought him a chart entry in 5 years. The single version of the song was issued on April 20, 1966. Also, Booker T. Jones plays piano on this song. As the Years Go Passing By was originally written by Peppermint Harris for Fenton Robinson, who recorded it in 1959 on Duke Records. The song was presented to Albert King by Larry Davis, and Albert King recorded his version on June 9, 1967. But in this album, it's credited to have been written by Deadrick Malone, owner of Duke Records, which was a customary practice for some producers and label owners at the time. The Very Thought of You is the last song on the album, which was written by Ray Noble in April 1934. The song in this album has been credited to Campbell, Conley and Company, which is British, and also to M. Whitmark and Sons, which is American. They both had the rights to publish the song at one point. Before Albert King recorded his version on June 9, 1967 in Memphis, it had been recorded by other musicians including Louis Russell in 1946, Little Willie John in 1961, and Ricky Nelson in 1964. Also later, Natalie Cole recorded a version of the song on her 1991 album Unforgettable with Love. The album cover shows some images of bad luck signs, including a black cat, a Friday the 13th calendar page, skull and crossbones, ace of spades, and snake eyes. On the back of the original album cover, Deanie Parker wrote, "If you've ever been hurt by your main squeeze, deceived by your best friend, or down to your last dime and ready to call it quits, Albert King has a solution if you have the time to listen." My rating for this album is 5 stars, as well as its rating in AllMusic, Music Hound Blues, and the Rolling Stones Jazz and Blues Album Guide. They all have rated this album at 5 stars. In 2012, Born Under a Bad Sign was among the list of the 500 greatest albums of all time in Rolling Stone magazine.